Every morning for 2 years, the Mafia Boss walked into the same coffee shop, same order, same seat by the window, and the same quiet girl behind the counter, who somehow always remembered what he liked without being told. He never once asked her name, until one rainy morning, she handed him his cup, and something was written on the side. He looked down and froze, because what she wrote changed everything. Before we get into this one, if you believe the smallest moments can lead to the biggest changes, take a second to comment below and hit subscribe, because this story is going to remind you that love sometimes starts with something as simple as a cup of coffee. Now, let's begin. Every city has its rhythm, the small routines that repeat themselves day after day without anyone really noticing. For the Mafia Boss, one of those routines had nothing to do with business, danger, or power. It was something far simpler. Every single morning, at exactly the same time, his car pulled up outside a small coffee shop on a quiet street corner, the kind of place most people in his world would never think to visit. He would walk in alone, sit at the same table by the window, and wait for the same cup of coffee, made exactly the way he liked it, without ever having to ask. Behind the counter, there was a chubby young woman who had worked there for as long as he had been coming. She was quiet, soft-spoken, the kind of person who moved through her day without asking for attention from anyone. She noticed things most people missed. She noticed that he liked his coffee slightly stronger on Mondays, when his week clearly started heavier than most. She noticed he barely touched his cup on the mornings his phone rang too many times before he even sat down. She noticed the small things, the quiet things, the things a busy world usually overlooks. And every single morning, without a single word passing between them beyond a nod, she had his coffee ready before he even reached the counter. For 2 years, this had been enough. He never asked her name. She never offered it. There was a strange kind of comfort in the silence between them, an unspoken understanding that neither of them needed to explain. He came in stressed some mornings and left calmer. She watched him quietly from behind the counter, never once treating him differently because of who he was outside those doors. To her, he wasn't the man people whispered about on the news, or the man his own men lowered their eyes around. To her, he was simply the quiet customer with the tired eyes who came in every morning at the same time. But this particular morning was different from the start. Rain fell steadily outside, turning the street gray and quiet, and the little shop was emptier than usual, just the two of them and the soft sound of rain against the windows. He walked in the same way he always did, shaking a little water off his jacket, taking his usual seat by the window. She moved behind the counter to prepare his coffee, but something about her hands seemed less steady than usual, a small hesitation in her movements that hadn't been there yesterday, or the day before, or any of the mornings before that. He didn't notice it right away, too caught up in his own thoughts, staring quietly out at the rain streaking down the glass. When she finally brought his cup over to the table, she set it down gently in front of him, her fingers lingering on it for just a second longer than usual before she stepped back. He barely looked up at first, reaching for the cup out of habit, the same way he had 1,000 mornings before. But something small along the side of the cup caught his eye, something that hadn't been there on any of the mornings that came before it. He paused, his hand still wrapped around the warm cup, and looked closer. Written along the side, in small, careful handwriting, were a few simple words, nothing dramatic, nothing loud, just a short line meant only for him to see. His eyes moved slowly across it, reading it once, then again, as if making sure he understood it correctly the first time. The quiet hum of the coffee shop around him seemed to fade into the background completely. For a man who had built his entire life around staying unreadable, around never letting anyone catch him off guard, something about those few small words made his expression shift in a way it never had before. Outside, his driver waited patiently by the car, checking the time the way he always did whenever the Mafia Boss stayed a little too long inside. But today, the minutes kept passing, and he didn't move from his seat by the window. He simply sat there, staring down at the cup in his hands, at the words written so carefully along its side, completely unaware that the woman behind the counter was watching him from a distance, holding her breath, waiting to see exactly what he would do next. He sat there a moment longer, the rain tapping softly against the glass beside him, his eyes still fixed on the small handwriting curved along the side of the cup. The words were simple, nothing more than a few lines, but somehow they carried more weight than anything anyone had said to him in years. He read them once more, slower this time, and for the first time since he had started coming to this shop, he actually looked up, past the counter, past the quiet hum of the espresso machine, straight at her. She froze the moment their eyes met, caught completely off guard, clearly not expecting him to notice so quickly, or maybe not expecting him to notice at all. Her hands gripped the edge of the counter gently, steadying herself, her heart pounding louder than she wanted to admit. For 2 years, she had kept a careful distance, always polite, always quiet, never once stepping outside the invisible line that existed between the customer and the woman who served him. But today, without meaning to, she had crossed it, and now there was no taking it back. He set the cup down slowly on the table, still watching her, and for a long moment, neither of them said anything at all. The silence between them felt different than all the silences before it, heavier somehow, but not in an uncomfortable way. It felt like the kind of silence that happens right before something important is about to be said. His driver outside checked his watch again, unaware of the quiet moment unfolding inside, unaware that the man who never stayed past his usual 10 minutes had now been sitting there for nearly 20, completely still, completely focused on one small cup of coffee. Finally, he spoke, his voice quieter than his men were used to hearing, carrying none of the coldness that usually filled a room the moment he entered it. He asked her, simply, why she wrote what she did. She hesitated, her fingers twisting slightly at the hem of her apron, clearly debating whether to tell him the truth or brush it off as nothing at all. This is the kind of moment so many of us know well, standing at the edge of saying something honest, wondering if it's safer to stay quiet instead. If you've ever hesitated like that yourself, afraid to say the thing you actually meant, comment below, never judge, because sometimes the bravest thing a person can do is simply tell the truth out loud. She took a breath and finally answered him honestly. She told him that for 2 years she had watched him come in every single morning, carrying something heavy behind his eyes that he never spoke about, never mentioned, never let anyone see clearly. She told him she noticed the mornings he seemed tired in a way sleep couldn't fix, the mornings his shoulders sat lower than usual, the mornings he barely touched his coffee at all. She wasn't trying to overstep, she said quickly, almost nervously. She just wanted him to know that someone had noticed. That was all. Nothing more than that. The Mafia Boss sat quietly, absorbing every word, something shifting slowly behind his usually guarded expression. In his world, people paid attention to him constantly, watching his every move, studying him for weakness, opportunity, or fear. But this was different. This wasn't calculation. This wasn't strategy. This was simply someone noticing him as a person, not as a name people whispered about, not as a threat or a target or a source of money and power, but as a tired man who came in for coffee every morning and never once had to ask for what he needed. He looked back down at the cup, at the small handwritten words still curved along its side, and for the first time in longer than he could remember, something in his chest loosened just slightly. He asked her one more question, softer than the first, the kind of question that had been sitting unspoken between them for 2 entire years without either of them ever saying it out loud. He asked her name. She opened her mouth to answer him, but before a single word could leave her lips, the small bell above the shop door rang sharply behind them, and both of their heads turned instantly toward the sound. toward the two unfamiliar men who had just stepped inside, their eyes scanning the room in a way that made the quiet, comfortable morning suddenly feel very different. Both men stood just inside the doorway, rain still dripping from their coats, scanning the small shop with the kind of practiced calm that told anyone paying attention they weren't here for coffee. The Mafia Boss's posture shifted instantly, the softness from a moment ago replaced by something sharper, more alert. He didn't turn his head fully, but his eyes tracked them carefully in the reflection of the window glass, the same quiet instinct that had kept him alive through years most people would never survive. The woman behind the counter felt the change in the room immediately, even without understanding exactly why. She had never seen him look at anyone the way he was looking at these two strangers now, and something about it made her stomach tighten. One of the men walked slowly toward the counter, glancing briefly at the menu board like an ordinary customer might, while the other lingered near the door, his eyes drifting toward the table by the window far too many times to be casual. The Mafia Boss set the coffee cup down without a sound, his fingers resting lightly near the edge of the table, calm on the surface, but coiled underneath, ready to move the moment he needed to. He spoke to her quietly, without looking directly at her, his voice low enough that only she could hear it. He told her to step back into the kitchen for a moment, to stay behind the counter, and not to come out no matter what she heard. She hesitated, confused, her eyes darting between him and the two strangers now standing far too close to where he sat. This wasn't the same man who had asked for her name only seconds earlier. This was someone else entirely, someone she had never seen before, and it frightened her more than she expected it to. She didn't move right away, and for a brief second, their eyes met again, his expression asking her silently to trust him, even though she barely understood what was happening. Finally, she stepped back slowly, disappearing just behind the edge of the counter, close enough to still see, but far enough to stay out of reach. The man who had approached the counter turned then, fully facing the Mafia Boss for the first time, his expression shifting from casual customer to something far colder. He said a name, quietly, almost like a question, confirming exactly who he was speaking to. The Mafia Boss didn't answer right away. Instead, he studied the man carefully, the same way he studied everyone who might be a threat, reading his stance, his hands, the slight bulge beneath his jacket that most people would never notice. Behind the counter, she watched with her heart pounding in her chest, gripping the edge of the counter so tightly her knuckles turned pale. She had spent 2 years learning the small details of this man's mornings, his moods, his tired eyes, but she realized now, watching this unfold, that she had never truly understood who he actually was outside these walls. The second man near the door shifted his weight, his hand moving slowly toward his jacket, and the entire shop seemed to hold its breath in that single, stretched-out second. This is the part of the story where everything either turns violent or turns into something far more careful and controlled. And for a man like the Mafia Boss, control was always the difference between walking out alive and not walking out at all. He rose slowly from his chair, unhurried, deliberate, his eyes never once leaving the two men now standing between him and the door. Outside, his driver, who had been quietly checking his watch only minutes earlier, suddenly noticed something wrong through the rain-streaked window and reached instinctively for the radio clipped to his jacket. Inside, the small coffee shop that had felt so warm and quiet just moments before now felt like the most dangerous place in the entire city. And as the Mafia Boss took one slow step forward, positioning himself carefully between the two strangers and the woman still hidden behind the counter, one single thought crossed his mind, sharp and unwelcome. If these men had found him here, in the one place he had never let his guard down, then someone, somehow, had been watching him far longer than he ever realized. That single thought settled over him like ice, sharp and clear, but there was no time to dwell on it now. The man closest to him took one step forward, and the Mafia Boss moved first, faster than either stranger expected from someone who had been sitting so calmly with a cup of coffee only minutes earlier. His hand shot out, gripping the man's wrist before he could reach fully into his jacket, twisting it with practiced precision that sent the stranger stumbling backward into a table, chairs scattering loudly across the floor. The second man lunged from near the door, but by then, the little bell above the entrance rang again, this time with far more urgency, as two of the Mafia boss's own guards burst through it, having been alerted by the driver only moments before. What followed happened fast, controlled, almost eerily quiet compared to what it could have been. Within seconds, both strangers were restrained, pressed against the counter, the entire confrontation lasting barely longer than it takes to finish a sentence. No shots fired, no chaos spilling into the street outside. Just quick, decisive control, the kind that came from years of exactly this sort of danger, finding him in places he least expected it. Behind the counter, she had stayed frozen through all of it, exactly as he told her to, her hands pressed against her mouth, watching a side of him she never knew existed, unfold in front of her in a matter of seconds. When it was finally over, when his men had the two strangers under control and were already speaking quietly into their radios, the Mafia boss turned back toward the counter, his breathing steady, his expression softening the moment his eyes found hers again. He walked slowly toward her, stepping carefully over an overturned chair, and for a moment, neither of them said anything at all. She looked shaken, understandably so, and he reached out gently, not touching her, simply letting his hand rest near hers on the counter, a small gesture meant to say more than words could in that moment. He told her quietly that she was safe now, that whoever sent those men would be dealt with, and that nothing like this would ever happen near her again, if he had anything to do with it. She finally found her voice, still trembling slightly, and asked him honestly if this was what his life was really like every single day. He nodded slowly, no longer trying to hide it from her the way he might have an hour earlier. He told her this was exactly why he had never asked for her name in 2 years, why he had kept himself distant even while coming to her shop, every single morning without fail. He hadn't wanted to bring any part of his dangerous world anywhere near the one quiet place that had nothing to do with it. She looked down at the coffee cup still sitting on the table nearby, slightly knocked over now, the small handwritten words on its side smudged from the chaos of the last few minutes. And yet, despite everything that had just happened, despite the danger that had walked through that door only moments earlier, she found herself not stepping away from him, but standing a little closer instead. She told him softly that she wasn't asking him to change who he was. She just wanted him to know, the same way she had written on that cup, that someone had noticed him, and that hadn't changed even after everything she had just witnessed. For the first time since he had walked into that shop 2 years ago, the Mafia boss reached out and gently took her hand, right there among the scattered chairs and the quiet aftermath of everything that had just unfolded. He finally told her his answer to the question he had asked her earlier, admitting quietly that from this day forward, he wasn't planning on letting mornings like this stay ordinary anymore. If a story like this moved you, if you believe love can find its way into even the most unexpected corners of someone's life, do one small thing for us before you go. Hit that subscribe button, because we have so many more stories just like this one waiting for you. Stories about quiet moments that turn into something no one ever saw coming. We would love for you to be here for the next one.